who had been a missionary on the island of Yap. And he noticed that in that culture, in the tribe, the elders would sit in a circle and they would discuss, and then everybody would sit around and listen. And so he designed the church that way, that the elders would preach a sermon together. They would all prepare together, and then they would discuss the verse together, and that always impacted me. So this is a real delight to see you and meet you today. Okay, I will just start talking and sharing about what we do, and hopefully the Lord has something for each person here through that. So I myself am an MK, missionary kid. I was born in the jungle in Erie and Jaya, grew up amongst headhunters and cannibals, and my mother was a nurse, my father was a Bible translator, and the summer of going into 5th grade, then my family moved back to Canada and then eventually ended up in Southern California, which I stayed, which is pretty much junior high, high school, college. I was in Southern California. So as a child, then of course all of us as children were deeply impacted and influenced by our parents and by what they do and by what they teach. And I have just beautiful memories of growing up. We lived in just a little house on stilts with a tin roof, and my mother cooked over firewood, in the stove, and we didn't have a bath in the house. We would just go down to the river and bathe every afternoon as a family, and swimming was bathing basically, and then we'd come back and we would eat. And then every night with kerosene lantern, then every single night, 7 nights a week, we would just read the Bible and pray together as a family and then go to sleep. And that's how I grew up. And I grew up with a pervasive understanding that the gospel isn't simply a message or something that you believe in intellectually, but that it's something that's filled with power, the power of God, that it's transformative, that where the gospel goes, people change, and light replaces darkness, and the power of the Spirit rises up in people, and peace overcomes division, and harmony begins to describe communities and families and churches, and that you can just see the work of God in people's lives in 1,000 different ways. And so, as I shared, we moved away from there, and then I kind of experienced the whole American life and played high school football and everything, just kind of forgot about my past. But then, in my late 20s, then the calling to go back overseas was kind of beginning to rise up in me. And my wife, Cindy, she had been called to go overseas since she was a little girl. And so that began to be stronger and stronger. And then, interestingly, on a road trip to the Grand Canyon, just driving in the car, we were praying and worshiping together. And the Lord just spoke to us and said, "It's time now. Sell or give away everything you have, resign from your work, and then move towards heading overseas." But the Lord didn't say where. And the Lord just said, "Whoever recruits you first, just go there." So sure enough, we got back from that trip, and just within a matter of weeks, we got an invitation to go back to Indonesia. And I had a master's degree in educational leadership, and someone needed a principal of a school. So we just said yes, and everything just going forward with that. And so with Katie, 2 years old, with Josiah, eight months old, then we moved back overseas to the same country where I grew up, but a totally different island. So Indonesia is a country of 17,000 islands. of which there were 5 main big ones where most people live. And the country stretches across the equator. You have your map there, but it's that group of islands just north of Australia. And it would stretch from Seattle to Florida. It's east to west, it's as wide as the United States. So the island where God called us to move to is probably 97% Islamic. And we moved into what we call a kampung, or just a densely populated kind of barrio in a large crowded city, and started living life there. And I became the principal of a small school there. And slowly we just learned the language and began adjusting to the culture and raising our kids and having a family in that area. And then I had the opportunity to go back and visit the island of Papua, which is where I grew up. The name had changed from Irian Jaya to Papua. And so I went back and I was just so excited, and I was excited to go back and visit my village, my tribe, and just reconnect. I hadn't seen them in many years. And I landed in Papua, and everything just felt different. Of course, it had been a long time since I was there, but I was warned, you don't want to be out at night. You want to be really careful here. And that didn't make any sense to me. When I was growing up there was over 1,300 missionaries. They had planted hundreds and hundreds of churches all across this island. Many books have been written about this island, and it was known as a Christian island, and I didn't understand, why would it be so dangerous at night? And then I just started seeing lost youth everywhere I looked, kids on drugs, gangs, all the kind of same issues you would have around the world in urban places, and tribes still at war. And someone told me about, there was a pastors' conference. So you had 400 pastors all gathered together. These were all Papuan men, and they started debating about whether the name of their denomination should have the word Indonesia or not. And there's some wanted kind of to be with Indonesia, the others were more for independence. So they started fighting, and then it started getting aggressive, and then they started punching and kicking each other, and then they ran outside, and these 400 pastors were throwing rocks at each other. And I just was thinking, did the gospel actually come here, And so it was a faith crisis for me. It was a faith crisis for me to just consider, is the gospel really powerful? Because I know the gospel has come here. And I've seen my own parents' work and the work of their generation, and it seems like it has all just evaporated away over a period of 20 to 30 years. All that work is gone, and the young people don't know Christ. And if you just find someone on the street and say, what's the meaning of the cross and the resurrection? They wouldn't have any idea what you're talking about, even though they go to church every Sunday. And so I had the opportunity to begin meeting with some of the retired missionaries from my parents' generation and really interviewing them and talking about what they did. And I remember I asked the question, did you have a strategy for discipleship? And the gentleman said, we didn't even use that word. It wasn't even part of our vocabulary. And he said, we were living under the kind of the belief that the year 2000 was associated with the second coming of Christ, and that in our times, missions was really defined as rapid church planting and movements and mass evangelism and mass large-scale baptisms in order to save as many people as possible, because the second coming was so imminent. So I began to see things from their perspective, and of course now here we are in 2021, and Christ hasn't returned yet. So there was so much rushing, and I could see how the strategy was quick, let's get it done. And so for me as a younger man, a word like movement was an extremely cool word. I think church planting movement, that was just the awesome word for me. And then I began to see, okay, that kind of thing. And I think the Lord was just working in me. That's not actually the model that Jesus gave us. And I just began realizing as I read the Gospels that Jesus himself took no shortcuts. He chose a group of 72, and out of that 72, he selected 12. And out of those 12, he selected 3. And he gave about 3 to 3.5 years of very intensive time to these young men in living with them night and day and talking and teaching them. And through hundreds, thousands of hours together, helping them to learn how to think, right? And that's what you were mentioning about from Philippians. How to think, what to do with your mind. And I see that's where, when you really dig into the teachings of Christ, he's trying to help them to learn how to see the world from a kingdom perspective. And what does that look like? How do you see reality? And so I began to realize that really the deepest, most powerful long-term strategy is precisely what Jesus demonstrated for us, that the most transformative and long-lasting form of ministry is intensive discipleship. And it's focused on the young. And so that really kind of sealed and confirmed my calling to invest my life in discipleship. And so I began studying and just learning. I became kind of obsessed with the concept of discipleship and just realizing that kind of the model of discipleship that I had kind of learned is like meeting at Starbucks with someone one-on-one, once a week for a cup of coffee and going through a book together. But the model of discipleship that Jesus gave us was actually about community, and it's about long, intense, it's about living life together. And so one thing led to another, and the Lord has called Cindy and I to open a school. And so in this school, Christian school in our city named Charis, and we started this school in 2001 with about 40 children. And there we began to just learn and try to demonstrate and teach and train discipleship of children. And so now, over the last 20 years, that little school has grown and grown. Now it's around 1,000 students from kindergarten through grade 12. And so from there is our model school, kind of our lab school, where our the foundation or the basis of our Christian education is the discipleship of the young. And so in 2011, the Lord moved in my heart to open a teacher's training program. And so kind of the breakthrough moment for me was like the Lord gave me this concept. If you have, let's say, one teacher, and this teacher is highly trained, and that teacher has been discipled and has been equipped and trained and prepared to disciple his or her students. And let's just say that teacher has 20 students a year, and that teacher teaches for 20 years. Then you have 400 transformed lives of young people. And so I started seeing, whenever I would see a young teacher, I could see behind that person there's 400 souls, hearts, souls, and mind. And so I began realizing that when you can impact a teacher, then you're impacting hundreds and hundreds of people that are just beyond that person. And so our ministry really began to become focusing on the recruiting and training and development and the discipleship of young teachers. So we began sending teams out into villages and finding young people and interviewing hundreds of people, but just really selecting young people to bring into what we call Transform Nation. It's the name of our teachers training college. And so we began bringing young people in. They live in the dorms, and we're with them. Even in this year, with COVID, everything has gone crazy, just like it has here. In Indonesia too, they've shut down schools and try to do online, but it doesn't really make sense, especially there when most people don't have. Some people don't even have electricity, let alone laptops in their houses. It's been a mess. But we've had this community of about 70 college-age students who are training to become teachers right there in our home, living right next door to us, and just being with them every single day. And so really the focus of our lives is in the development of our lab school, Charis, and teaching and mentoring and discipling the teachers there, and then with Transform Nation and preparing young people to go out and be teachers. And so they've been graduating from this program basically with a bachelor's degree and a teacher's certificate. And then they go out in the villages, and many of them open schools. And so we're looking at, maybe around 30 schools that have been started in villages and communities or just different places through our network over the years that we work with. So probably around 3,000 children are participating in our schools around the country. And then just 3 years ago, the Lord led for us to open what we call Elevate. And Elevate is a program. So Transform Nation is 4 years, very intensive. I tell the students they're like the special forces of, teachers. They're really, really intensively discipleship. Let's put it discipled. But for Elevate, it's only 3 months. And so we just said, okay, Islam is expanding and having so much influence, and it's very aggressive. And as I mentioned earlier, in Papua, not only are they forgetting the gospel, but they're turning to Islam, because Islamic missionaries are going in there. What are they doing? They're starting schools, and they're reaching the children with Islam, and they're just wiping out the work of a century of missions work, during the 20th century. And so we're just burdened to push back against that and kind of to rescue the Christian islands from this influence. So that's really where we're sending most of our teachers and opening Christian schools in villages. And so with Elevate, it's much more, I just had the feeling, all right, Transform Nation is great, it's making an impact, but Islam is moving with so much finances and so many people are moving in, taking over. We have to do something, at least kind of planting a flag. So with Elevate, we'll just bring young people, whoever. There's not a selection process, but who wants to start a kindergarten in your village? Okay. And then they come and we give them 3 months of discipleship, 3 months of teacher training, and then they go back and we help them start a kindergarten. And it's just kind of like planting the flag, and then we'll see what happens. And I was thinking, if even 10% of these schools make it, this will be an amazing success. But it's more like 80% are continuing on and really making an impact in these villages. So also just 5 years ago, the Lord just led in my heart to start another program. It's called Stream, and this is working together with one of my close friends who's Indonesian. He's a businessman. I set my alarm so I would know not to go overtime, because I could talk all day like this. Okay, so I'll just close with talking a little bit about Stream here. Okay, so millions of young men all right, don't even go to high school, probably junior high. Most of them are illiterate. They have no job skills. They have no opportunity for work. What they do is their fathers are rural farmers, and then that's what they do. They go back and they farm. But there's so much hopelessness amongst that generation of young people. So Stream is a program that we started to reach young men. And so the vast majority are not Christian men, but they're just young guys, lost. They're just maybe hanging out. You know, they don't really have any dreams. And so we're going out into the kind of the poorest, most, I guess, just kind of hopeless places. And we're finding young men and just saying, would you be interested in coming? It's a 2-year commitment. And I tell them, this is not easy. It's the hardest thing you will have ever done your whole life. You have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning every morning. We have 6 hours of teaching in the Bible, and then you have your skills training. And the skills training, we have different tracks that the young men get training with skills. We have air conditioning, maintenance, and we have automobile mechanics, motorcycle mechanics, and we have industrial sewing, where they can learn to sew heavy duty materials like leather. They can make guitar cases or tents or backpacks. And we're just in the process of forming a construction track for them. So they have a year of skills training combined together with discipleship. And it's kind of like boot camp feel. They have their hair shaved, and they wake up in the morning and they do the calisthenics and they have to run, but it's kind of like building discipline into them. And so there's a lot of scripture memorization, and the majority of them, not all, but the vast majority of the students, we've had now over 300 that have graduated from the program. And then we do our best to try to help the graduates in order to actually start their own businesses based on the skills. So we even give them loans to start their businesses. And the vast majority of them come to true faith in Christ, and they want to be baptized. And so even just a few weeks before I came here, we baptized 11 that day. And so that's kind of a little snapshot about what we do and what God has done. So I hope that something there might encourage you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to just share with you today. It's been a real privilege. Thank you.
Let's have a little time of prayer
Okay.
for you and your family.
All right, thank you.